Roll call. Mr. Fanning.
Here.
Ms. Miles.
Here.
Mr. Dorsweiler.
Here.
Mr. Sharp.
Here.
Mr. Stanford.
Here.
That is our committee for the day. Our second item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the August 15th, 2019 regular meeting. Has everyone had time to review that? And do you have any questions directed towards the committee or to the staff? Then I would ask for a motion of the August 15th, 2019 regular meeting.
I move that the minutes be approved as written.
I second that motion.
I have a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Any new business that needs to come before the board before we hit the agenda? Okay. Moving on to item 3.1, application V19-7 filed by Brandon Keisner, requesting a maximum storage building size variance of 32 square feet from 360 square feet. The maximum size of a storage building allowed in a residential district to 392 square feet to allow the construction of a 16 by 24.5 foot rear yard storage building. The subject property is legally described as Lot 25, Block 3 of Golden Eagle Estates Edition Number 4 to the city of Salina, Saline County, Kansas, and addressed as 2202 Devon Place.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Staff.
You'll notice the outlined blue parcel on the aerial photo here. This is our subject property. It is located at the northwest corner of Red Hawk Lane and Devon Place. So it is a semi cul-de-sac property with a little bit different, unique pie-shaped configuration. This particular property is located in Golden Eagle Estates Edition Number 4, which was platted in 2005. The dwelling that you're looking at on the screen was constructed in 2009 and contains over 1,700 square feet of living space, as well as an attached 3-car garage. In July, the applicant, Brandon Keisner, applied for a building permit for a 16-foot by 24.5-foot shed in his backyard, and we identified that the shed was larger than the 360 square feet, which is the maximum. So we gave him the option of reducing the size of the proposed storage shed to 360 square feet, or applying to this body for a size variance to the size of the detached garage. And the applicant chose to apply for a variance. And as part of their justification, they state that there's insufficient space available to construct a driveway to reach the backyard and build a garage. So the location in which the applicant is proposing the storage shed would be the northwest corner of the property, as that's the portion of his yard that has the most open space that would be available for a detached structure. And he has a 7.5-foot setback along the west side of his dwelling next to the driveway that prohibits him from having a detached garage, because you have to have 8 feet in order to get to the back with a driveway. The driveway has to be 8 feet wide. So that's the reason that we're here to discuss the oversized shed that's being proposed, and that oversized shed is 392 square feet, which is 32 square feet over the 360 square foot maximum. So the regulations do have a 360 square foot maximum, as well as a 16-foot maximum height limitation for storage sheds. The surrounding area consists of all R zoning districts and single-family homes. So all of the neighboring properties are zoned the same with very similar character to them. When we look at the uniqueness of this particular property, the applicant states that the property is a corner lot and that the shape and configuration of the lot in relation to the existing dwelling makes it difficult to have a detached garage in the rear, which is why he wants to have a storage shed, which otherwise a detached garage would be permitted if you could reach it with a driveway. Staff, if we go to aerial photo, John, staff would agree that, as we mentioned, there isn't enough space here to have a driveway to get to a detached garage here. And if you were to have a detached garage that could be over the 360 square feet, that is the limitation of a storage shed, it would have to have a driveway. That's very helpful. You'd have to have a driveway all the way from Red Hawk Lane, which is going to be over 150 feet in length to get back to the portion of the property where you have sufficient space for a structure as it the shape of the lot in relation to the dwelling. It is fairly narrow here at the east end, so you would have to have a lengthy driveway in order to have a detached garage, and so that's why the applicant is proposing a storage shed instead. Looking at the adverse effects on the neighbors, the applicant states that increasing the size from 16 feet by 22 and a half to 16, which is the allowable under the current code, to 16 feet by 24 and a half will not be noticeable to the neighboring property owners and still falls within the size limitations of a detached garage that he could build if he could get a driveway back to his backyard. Staff would agree and also note that the property is also somewhat unique, and I didn't mention this under uniqueness, in that it is a corner lot, and so you have two front yards. You have the Devon Place front yard, which is where the house is addressed off of, and the front door and the garage face. And then you also have the Red Hawk Lane. So these are two front yards, and you have two side yards and no real rear yard. But the applicant is correct that his structure would not be overly noticeable. We're only talking 32 square feet, which is a 9% difference over the 360 square, above the 360 square foot maximum. And if we can go to the elevation drawings, John, the proposed structure would be compatible in terms of the materials and design with the existing residence, as it would have lap siding, similar roof pitch, asphalt shingles, and a door that is an overhead door but is narrow enough where it doesn't classify as a garage. It would be wide enough to get larger equipment, lawnmowers in and out of, but not a vehicle. Staff would note that we received feedback from one of the adjacent property owners. The adjacent property owner believes that the proposed building looks nice, but they are opposed to the approval of the variance to a maximum allowable size of the storage building on this property. And the biggest reason that they are opposed to this request is because of the potential negative precedent that they fear it may set. And so the adjacent property owners believe that everyone in the subdivision should follow the same rules so that there isn't a negative precedent set for the neighborhood. In looking at the hardship or necessary hardship of this property, the applicant states that they currently do not have any existing structures, any detached structures. The only storage that they have are the attached garages. And they believe that the existing attached garage is not sufficiently sized for their vehicles, their personal storage of items, and the woodworking shop equipment that the owner has. And so he is looking to add this storage shed so that he can have personal storage as well as woodworking equipment and woodworking space outside of the existing attached garage. Staff can see the difficulty of constructing the detached garage, as there is no real rear area, and that the only location you can put up a detached structure is either too far away or a long distance, a fair distance of 150 feet or more from Red Hawk, or is inaccessible from Devon Place based on the setback of the west side. However, one thing that we are challenged with understanding and having a difficulty time understanding is the reason that the extra 32 square feet is necessary. Why wouldn't a 360 square foot shed in lieu of a 392 square foot shed work? And so that's something we'd want more information from the applicant on, or some clarification from them on. And looking at the effect on the public health, safety, and welfare, the applicant states that the impacts from the larger shed would be localized and barely noticeable, and that the location of the building will not have any negative impacts on the general public at large. And staff would agree that the extra 32 square feet would be very negligible. It wouldn't be a large increase in size over the maximum, and that we're not looking to block sunlight, air, or increase fire spread, or have a negative impact on stormwater runoff or drainage with the proposed shed. When we look at the conformity with the general spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance, the applicant states that the proposed storage building would be residential in appearance and character, and would be compatible with the existing dwelling in terms of its design and materials and appearance. And the purpose and intent of the limitations on the detached accessory structures in the zoning code are to keep the residential components of the neighborhood residential in character, and so that we don't have buildings that are overly large or out of scale with the residential dwellings, and we don't have a lot of detached structures that are creating a lot of clutter, and we don't have massive buildings that could potentially be tempted to be used in a commercial way versus the residential intention that an accessory structure in a residential district is intended for. So the primary concern that staff would have with a variance request like this isn't necessarily the storage shed itself, but it's that if a storage shed is erected, the applicant would still then be able to potentially also have a detached garage if he or a future homeowner decided that they did want to have a driveway come all the way off of Red Hawk and build something else back here. And that additional 768 square feet would potentially create a situation where you have too much bulk, where you have a shed that's overly sized, and then you have another detached structure that is also the maximum size for a detached garage. So that's something that we would be concerned about, and we would like the board to consider when they're making their determination on this application. Staff's comments: we believe that having sufficient physical space is not necessarily sufficient justification, although we do have enough physical space, at least in the northwest corner of the property. We also believe that the compatibility and really focusing on how compatible the structure is to the existing residential dwelling in the neighborhood is really important. And so that really comes down to the spirit and intent and conforming to that. The number 5 criteria that you'll find on page 6 and the top of page 7. And that's whether or not the proposed building will be out of scale with the surrounding area, and the proposed building will maintain the residential appearance and character of the neighborhood. In this case, the applicant's garage does have a gabled roof that would be similar to the existing roof that the dwelling already has. It will have lap siding similar to the existing dwelling, and if the lap siding is painted in the same color as the house and the same shingles are used on the roof of the detached storage shed, we do believe that it would conform in terms of the material and design and appearance with the neighborhood. And with that, the building would meet all of the zoning requirements for a storage shed, with the exception of the 32 square feet extra allowable space that's being requested by the applicant. We do have a number of possible findings on page 8 for you, and the board could approve the variance as requested if the required findings of fact can be made. The second option is the board could approve a lesser variance than requested if the required findings of fact can be made, and the board could postpone action on this application with the consent of the applicant if additional information is needed, or the board could deny the requested variance if sufficient findings cannot be made by the board. We believe that there are sufficient findings for the 5 criteria. The one criteria that we are still questioning is the hardship that the applicant would endure if the storage shed was limited to the 360 square foot maximum. And if the applicant provides sufficient information that is satisfactory to the board, then we would recommend approval, and we would do so with the 5 conditions listed on page 9. And the first one being that the storage building be located at least 5 feet from any side yard lot line or closest wall, or that it be fire rated to protect fire spread. Number 2 is that the proposed storage building and workshop be compatible in design, materials, and color with the existing house, which the applicant is proposing to do, but we would make that a condition of approval to make sure that that's executed. And number 3, the construction must substantially correspond to the building plans and details as submitted to the board. Number 4, and be subject to an issued building permit. And number 4, the storage building shall be used only for personal storage and personal use and not any business purposes. And number 5, that this detached storage shed would be erected in lieu of a detached garage. So with approval of this variance, it would eliminate the applicant's ability to have a secondary storage structure that would be a detached garage. With that, we'll take any questions the board may have.
Thank you, Mr. Ayers. Any question of staff?
Yeah, I have a question. Good. For the staff. Most of the garages that we see have driveways that are solid concrete. Does the city or your office approve of alternative driveways, such as those that are built on pavers that let the water rain through, or that perhaps a person uses a 2-path where the tires would go rather than a full concrete width?
The residential district regulations for single-family residential are allowed to have different types of paving surfaces for parking, and it could range from gravel to millings to rock to paving to asphalt to permeable pavement to the types of blocks that you're talking about. The applicant can speak more to it, but I think the deterrent for a detached garage in this case is reasonable access. Reasonable access meaning he can't come off of the existing driveway and get around the house. And in order to get back here, he'd have to have a second curb cut created with a driveway all the way from Red Hawk to the area of the yard where it's large enough.
Thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Okay, hearing none, we will go to the applicant. If the applicant would come forward and stand for any questions, please state your name and address.
Excuse me. My name is Brandon Kistner, 2202 Devon Place.
Do you have what comments you might have?
The only thing I could say is, if I could build a garage back there with the driveway per the city requirement of the foundation, at 400 square feet or less, you got to have a monolithic slab and footing. Over 400 square feet, then you've got to do the frost line footing, and stem wall and slab. So technically, I could do a garage back there, I believe, if I could get the driveway to it, and I'm still under that 400 square foot requirement with the 392 I'm requesting.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Could you explain the need for the additional square footage, approximately 30 square feet?
Honestly, just trying to maximize the space up to the 400 square feet. Is it absolutely necessary? Probably not. It just seems to me to make sense to try to maximize, excuse me, the 400 square feet that I could go to with the foundation that I'm choosing to use.
Are you planning to build this yourself or have a contractor build it?
Contractor will do the concrete, and I will erect the rest of it myself.
You have a background in construction?
I do. I built houses for probably 5 years, and then I'm a licensed electrician with about 10 years' experience in the field, so.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions of the applicant? Okay, seeing none. Thank you. We will ask for any comments by interested citizens. I don't see anyone else out there.
I think the only property owner we heard from is the one that we summarized their comments in our staff report. That was the only nearby resident that we received any comment from.
All right. We'll bring it back to the board here. Any further discussion?
I have a question about the actual variance that he's asking for. If we don't give him the additional 30 feet, does he need a variance?
If you don't, I guess the best way to look at it is what is allowed by code is 16 feet by 22 and a half feet. What he's proposing is 16 feet by 24 feet. If you do not approve the 392 square feet, he still has the right to get a building permit to build a 360 square foot. So in approving or not approving a variance, it's not a question of whether the building can be there or be built. It is a question of the dimensions of the building that you think should be approved there.
Okay, thank you.
And we only have the authority to issue a permit for a size up to 360 square feet, and the authority to go larger than that lies with this board.
All right. Thank you. Any other further discussion?
I think if he's doing this in lieu of having a detached, like the staff had put in their recommendations, then it seems reasonable, but may not be necessary just for the extra 32 feet.
I have another question. The standard allows for 2 storage sheds to be in the backyard. That's correct.
One garage.
One garage
and one storage shed.
Yeah,
Two accessory structures.
yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. So that brings the other question in. If we give him the extra square footage, could we limit him to no additional storage sheds and no additional garages?
They mentioned the garage. I don't know about the storage shed restriction.
Yeah, staff has already said we could approve in lieu of a garage, but my question would be, could he still in another year build a second
Well, the
storage shed?
code
He
only,
could.
the zoning ordinance only allows for 1 storage shed. So you
Okay.
couldn't build 2 storage sheds.
Okay.
Now, the code would allow for you to have 1 storage shed and 1 detached garage.
Okay.
But what we're proposing is that that second detached garage not be allowed.
Okay,
So
good.
that this would be the accessory structure. There wouldn't be any other accessory structures under what is being proposed in, as far as conditions in the report.
Okay, thank you.
The way that we have attempted, and it's, again, that's just a possible condition for you to consider, but the idea is that this larger shed would be approved in lieu of him having the ability to later add a garage.
All right, thank you.
Having said that, if this is all he's going to be limited to, if we approve it as a shed. So he wouldn't be able to, and if we gave him the in lieu of a garage, then this would be it for him. So approving the additional square footage, even though he talked about maximizing the 400 square feet, since he's got the odd-shaped yard, and he's going to have to build this in lieu of the garage, I could see giving him the additional square footage based on the different size lot and the limiting to this one building.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's my feeling.
Yeah.
Having said that, would there be a motion, please?
Chairman, I move that we approve the variance with all of the staff recommendations included on page 9, with the importance of the staff recommendation number 5, that this be approved in lieu of the garage. And I base this motion on the fact that he does have an odd-shaped yard, and it is difficult for him to put a garage, or excuse me, put a driveway to the garage. And after building this in lieu of a garage, he won't be able to build any additional buildings in the back. So that's his hardship that I understand it.
I'll second that motion.
I have a second. Any further discussion? And I would call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion on the floor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the motion's passed.
So for your benefit then, there's no further action on your part. We have what we need. We will, we'll send you a letter summarizing today's action, and then that has the effect of allowing us to issue a permit based on the plans that you have submitted.
Thank you. Moving on, agenda item 3.2, application number V19-8, filed by Michael Koloff, requesting a maximum storage building size variance of 240 square feet from 360 square feet, the maximum size of storage building allowed in a residential district to 600 square feet, to allow the construction of a 20-foot by 30-foot rear yard storage building. The subject property is legally described as Lot 12, Block 1 of the Woodland Hills Estates addition to the city of Salina, Saline County, Kansas, and addressed as 410 Pine Ridge Drive. Staff?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that I have a conflict of interest regarding this application, so if it's all right, I'd like to excuse myself.
Very well.
So you could wait on the bench out there, Mr. Dorsweiler, and we'll call you back in. Thank you.
This application is located on the east side of Pine Ridge Drive and is part of the Woodland Hills Estates addition. And that particular subdivision was platted in 1995, and the applicant's dwelling was constructed in 1999. And the dwelling itself features almost 1,700 square foot of living area, as well as a 3-car attached garage, and is 19 feet tall at its peak. In July of 2019 of this year, the applicant, Michael Koloff, applied for a building permit to construct a 20 by 30 detached garage in the northwest corner of the backyard. If we go to the, yep, perfect. So there was a detached garage that was proposed in this area of the yard, and staff informed the applicant that there are covenants on this property that are outside of the zoning regulations that would prohibit him, according to the covenants of the property, from building a detached garage. And so the applicant then applied for a storage shed, and we informed him that the storage shed exceeded 360 square feet. However, he could reduce the size of the storage shed or apply for a variance, and he has chosen to bring his request to you as in the form of a variance of 240 square feet to construct the detached shed, storage shed, shown on the site plan on the overhead there. The zoning ordinance, as we discussed in the last item, does have a limitation of 360 square feet, so this is a deviation of 240 square feet. The surrounding areas all are single-family, where although the adjacent property owners are very similar in character. When we look at the uniqueness of the property, the applicant states that this property is unique compared to other residential properties because the subdivision, Woodland Hills Estates, prohibits detached garages. So in most subdivisions across the city of Salina, he could construct a 600 square foot detached garage and would meet zoning requirements as well as meeting the requirements of the property. This particular property is unique in that it does have a set of covenants that prohibit detached garages, and that is abnormal and not typical for residential properties within Salina. In looking at the adverse effects on the neighbors, the applicant states the design and appearance of the storage building will be compatible with the existing dwelling and with the residential neighborhood that surrounds his property. He states that the proposed shed is smaller than the 24 by 32 detached garage that could be built on most other residential dwellings within the city of Salina. Staff would agree that the design and appearance of the proposed storage shed is compatible. It does have a hipped roof. It has horizontal siding, lap siding, and if it were painted with the same color and similar shingles, it would be compatible with the existing dwelling in terms of the design, materials, and appearance. We did receive feedback from one of the neighboring property owners, and that feedback was that the adjacent property owner believes that the proposed building would divert additional water through their backyard, which is already prone to flooding from the neighborhood's water collecting on their property. The neighboring property owner states that they already have stormwater runoff issues with water rising up against the foundation 4 to 5 inches deep on several occasions. The neighbor believes additional water would result in a direct threat to their house and to the property, effectively reducing their property values. As a result, they are not in favor of the requested variance. We also received a letter which I have passed out to you from another adjacent property owner. And it is from an individual that is located at 414 Pine Ridge Drive, located adjacent to the south property line of 410 Pine Ridge Drive, which is the subject property. And in this particular case, the applicant states that they believe that the declaration of the covenants do prohibit the construction of a detached garage, and they believe that the declaration of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions state that lots and parcels of land thereof will not be given away, sold, leased, conveyed, or in any way alienated into any person or entity except subject to the terms and limitations, which one of those is the limitation of having a detached garage. And they list out in the letter the various covenant restrictions on the property, and they state that garages are not allowed, and that the applicant's variance request for a 600 square foot oversized storage building being built on the lot, that the structure requested dimensions and square footage are comparable to a large detached garage, and that the plans show a 10-foot addition of new concrete running from the drive along the home to the back of the home with a concrete approach at the oversized storage building's doorway, and the dimensions of the drive are wide enough for many types of vehicles. This stretch of concrete runs just a few feet north of my property's master bedroom suite, and that the usage of the activity and activity potential of this structure is immense and could very easily cause nuisance to the neighborhood. If we could go to the site plan, John will point out some of these things that the applicant is referring to. Or that yeah, not that the applicant is referring to, but the individual from the public. So the applicant is proposing a driveway extension on the south side of the existing driveway and house, and then they're also proposing a landing on the entrance door of the storage shed. Originally, the applicant, when he was proposing a detached garage, had a driveway that went all the way back, but that has been eliminated, and that this has been converted to a storage shed with a storage door and not a garage door. And the driveway that is mentioned by the adjacent property owner is not part of this variance request and isn't limited by the covenants and would be allowed by the zoning regulations. The adjacent property continues with, I have been involved in real estate since getting my real estate license in 1968. Over the years, I have seen the effects of CCRs in neighborhoods throughout Salina County. Experienced real estate developers, builders, appraisers, and agents often share stories about developments not protected by covenants, conditions, and restrictions. CCRs are essential to regulate the use, appearance, and maintenance of property in a development. Buyers of any property should consider their personal needs and review any CCRs applicable to an area prior to purchasing in that area. CCRs are intended to restrict the usage of a property. These restrictions are meant to protect the homeowner's right to enjoy their home in an expected manner. Indiscretions and variances can allow unforeseen change and future usage that is not fair to the homeowners who investigate, understand, and abide by the development CCRs. Negative indiscretions and variances can cost neighboring property and neighborhoods both personally and financially. They can result in the loss of the anticipated and expected enjoyment of their home. They can cost financially thousands of dollars in value realized at sale. Buyers who earnestly take the steps to diligently check CCRs and invest in a home and area that meet and protects one and all in the neighborhood should be protected by the CCRs in place. Due diligence should not be penalized with unwanted variance. Sincerely, Joan Wilson, the adjacent property owners. So that's the feedback we've received. We did receive, again, the neighbor that's concerned about stormwater runoff and the impacts it may have on their property, and then this particular applicant who believes that the storage shed, even though it's not a detached garage, is acting in lieu of a detached garage in terms of its bulk and is concerned about the impacts it may have on the neighborhood. So the proposed storage shed is 600 square feet and would reduce the permeable surface area of the property by 600 square feet, potentially increasing stormwater runoff. Staff does acknowledge that. And so if the board does wish to approve the variance as requested, staff would recommend that a gutter and downspout system be designed to pipe water to Pine Ridge Drive so that the proposed building does not divert any additional water onto any of the neighboring properties. Looking at unnecessary hardship, the applicant states that the subdivision covenants create a hardship in this case because they prevent the construction of a detached garage that could be as large as 20 by 30, which could otherwise be built in the same location in most other subdivisions. Staff believes that this hardship in this case is the protective covenants, and even though staff could issue a building permit for a detached garage that is 20 by 30, it wouldn't really do any good because the applicant would be in opposition of the covenants, which is why he has not chosen to pursue a detached garage. But the detached garage prohibition is the hardship in this case. The effect on public health, safety, and welfare. The applicant states that the increased building size will not block sunlight, increase the risk of fire spread, or negatively impact drainage patterns on the neighboring properties, and that any impacts would be localized to the adjacent property owners and the general public would not be affected. Staff does not believe the proposed size or location of the storage would impact the general public, and we do agree that any implications would be localized to the adjacent property owners, but we believe that if a proper downspout system and water control system is put in place, that there wouldn't be any negative impacts as no sunlight or of air or increased fire spread would be present with this property. The conformity with general spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance. As with the last application, the reason we have limitations on storage sheds and detached garages and accessory buildings like this is so that we don't over-inundate the properties with large structures that are out of scale and out of character for a residential setting. And we also try to minimize any kind of stormwater runoff implications that a storage shed could, or detached garage could introduce onto a residential property. And we also don't want to have a lot of clutter in buildings in close proximity where fire spread becomes a risky issue. In this particular case, the proposed storage shed would meet all of the required side yard setbacks, and we don't see fire spread being an issue. And if a proper downspout system were in place, it shouldn't have negative impacts on flooding out or increasing water runoff for the adjacent property owners. Staff's comment. In this case, again, sufficient physical area is not in and of itself sufficient justification for a variance. The proposed storage shed would meet the compatibility requirements in that it would have a similar lap siding, similar color, similar roof, similar shingles. So we don't see that as being an issue. The biggest issue that is really up to the board to look at is whether or not the hardship of the covenants is a legitimate reason for having a shed that is larger than what is typically allowed. Again, if it weren't for the covenants, a larger detached garage of 600 square feet could be allowed without coming to this particular body. We do have a number of findings that we've listed. We have 5 of them listed on the bottom of page 8 and the top of page 9. And the board could approve the maximum storage shed size variance as requested if the required findings of fact can be made. Option number 2, the board could approve a lesser size variance than is being requested if you feel the 600 square feet is too large, but maybe something greater than 360 square feet still may be warranted. Number 3, the board could postpone action on this application if additional information is needed. And number 4, the board could deny the applicant's request if the appropriate findings of fact cannot be made. In this case, the proposed storage shed does meet the conformity requirements to the residential properties in terms of its materials and appearance and design. If the board wishes to approve this variance request, then staff would recommend that the approval of the size variance request be subject to 5 conditions listed on the bottom of page 9. With that, we'll take any questions you may have.
Questions of staff?
I have one question. When you discussed the driveway that was going to run parallel with the current driveway around the building, and then there was going to be a landing, and you said part of that was removed, where did that discussion come from? Was that part of the original plan that the person submitted?
So you'll see this bubbly cloud.
Yes.
Originally, the applicant applied for a detached garage and was going to have a driveway that came around to that detached garage. Now, one requirement and one of the distinctions between a detached garage and a storage shed is that a detached garage has to have a driveway that creates access from the storage structure to a street. And so this driveway was to act as the access. Since that time, since the applicant cannot have a detached garage and is applying rather for a storage building that would function as a storage building and workshop, this driveway has been eliminated. However, a landing has been retained on the storage shed outside the structure, and the driveway area that would create additional parking has been retained as well on the south side of the existing house. Now, the driveway is inconsequential because it's not part of this application and is permitted without even a permit, since it's flat work on a private property. But it is something to note in terms of how we got to this point and the evolution of the project, going from a detached garage
Right.
to a storage shed.
And you've answered me completely. Thank you.
So a covenant is law, like he couldn't just build it and deal with his neighbors being upset with him.
Well, a covenant is a contractual agreement between all of the property owners that live in the subdivision and each other, saying that these are the rules that we are going to abide by.
So it'd be a breach of contract or something similar.
It would be very similar to that, yes. So even though it's not a zoning requirement, it's a requirement that has potential consequences for the applicant.
And do the covenants explicitly state how large a storage structure can be, or do they base it on the zoning?
It doesn't say anything about storage sheds. There are a number of storage sheds in the Woodland Hills subdivision, but it doesn't have any language that we could find that prescribes anything about them.
What is the allowable percentage of improvement for the dwelling itself and any accessory structures? Is there a percentage that you guys go by, like 33% of overall improvement allowed on the lot?
There is a maximum lot coverage, and I don't remember off the top of my head. It's either 30 or 35%. Do you know off the top
Our
of your head?
district, it's 30%, but it is not a limit on impervious surface. So if you have a concrete patio, or if you have the whatever, and the applicant would be in the best position to describe what that purpose of the paving is there, but the 30% deals with the amount of structure under rooftop that's allowed on a lot, and it does not, we do not have anything that addresses impervious surface.
Okay. Any other questions of staff?
I have one more question.
Yes, please.
I know one of the distinctions between a garage and a storage shed is the overhead door we've talked about in the past.
Yes.
The door I see pictured in the right side of this picture is it's a swinging door. It's going to be 6 feet wide. What would be the minimum for a typical garage door?
You would be over 8 feet wide for a garage door.
Thank you.
Most sheds are in the 6 to 7 foot dimension.
Okay, thank you.
Again, any other questions of staff, other members? All right. We'll go now to the applicant, if he would please come forward, state his name and address.
So I am Mike Kolhoff, 410 Pine Ridge Drive. And probably the best place to begin with some of this is the history of buying the property. When we bought the property, there was no mention of covenants. And as far as we know, there's no homeowners association that applies any of the restrictions to the covenant that exists. The only time we saw a covenant was when it was brought to our attention that it was part of the original Woodland Hills application. So that being said, one of the reasons we bought the house was the idea of putting a large storage building in the back for playthings, for hobbies and that kind of stuff. When we found out the size of the building that we wanted couldn't be that large unless it was a garage, We said, okay, we'll build a garage back there, but we just won't park any cars back there because that's going to be where we keep our woodworking stuff, our craft stuff. And so we made the application, and we found out, well, there's this covenant that you can't actually have a garage in this area. I think there's still some question about whether that covenant is really applicable or not, or whether it disappeared, but you guys know better than I would on that kind of a thing. So we went with just a storage building, which is basically what we wanted, but asking for a variance to make it large enough to do the things we wanted to do in it. I do have a question. What was the address of the runoff?
I don't know, do we have that one?
It was on Sides Drive. I'd have to go,
On site. So behind us or something?
I think
To the rear.
it's behind the subject property.
yes.
Okay. I didn't catch that when you said it, and so. And that makes sense, because they're kind of on the downhill side of things there. So and again, the driveway on the side I know is not part of this, but one of the reasons we're putting a driveway on the side is if you notice from the pictures, I've got a trailer sitting out front that I do not want sitting out front. I want to make the neighborhood look nicer, put it along the side, and we'll have some fencing up there to where it will be hidden from public view. Part of the use of the building, can you flip the building back up there, please?
The site plan?
There you go. The north end of it is 10 by 20. We're looking at storing, oh my gosh, technology strikes. Thank you. So that area right in there, 10 by 20, we're looking at that for storage of lawn equipment, garden equipment, snow blowers, that type of thing. Also, my wife's big in putting things out, so we'll have storage shelves in there to house all the watering and pottery and that kind of thing. Then this area, and it probably could be argued that I have way too many hobbies, but I enjoy golfing and sailing and woodworking, and I'm also a licensed electrician back in the day, which I've since given up on, but there's not enough room in the house for all that to happen. The original idea was to put an overhead garage door in there so I could put a drop-down net so I can actually have my golf system to where I don't accidentally knock a hole in the wall, that we have netting, open the door, hit the golf balls out towards the netting with the drop. The woodworking equipment then would fit in there. Yeah. And then as far as my neighbor, next door neighbor's concern about being unsightly, might just mention that on the northwest corner of her house, there are actually no windows. There's no windows other than just looking straight to the west. Quite honestly, I don't see her going anywhere other than out the front door. So I don't know that her backyard is utilized. Yeah. So, oh, well, I guess the other thing that I noticed in the pictures there, the building that size gives me the opportunity to also get those ladders off of the property instead of being up against the wall. Some 10, 12, 14-foot long ladders, they don't fit very well in normal structures, so. Okay.
We apologize that I don't believe we have this in your packet. This is the actual floor plan that Mr. Kohlhoff submitted for how the space would be used, and I don't believe we got that inserted into your packet, so he was kind of describing the shelving and how he would divide and use the building. So this floor plan gives you a indication of how he would utilize the space if the 20 by 30 foot dimension were approved.
Any other questions for Mr. Koloff?
I have a question. How long has your trailer been sitting out in the driveway?
Ever since we moved in.
And the neighbor that provided us the covenants in her letter, she didn't write you a letter then, or nobody's approached you about it?
No.
So it's not
No.
enforced very often?
Yeah, so I had a discussion with one of the lawyers in town, I won't mention who it was, about these covenants. And his question was, well, is there an HMO? No. He says, well, I don't know who there is to enforce the covenant, because usually there's an HMO that deals with covenants.
In HOA.
HOA. Hold
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
What's HMO? Oh, that's
Yeah.
healthcare.
Yeah.
Yeah, the homeowners association, HOA. Thank you. So his thought was, there's probably no enforcement agency available to do that. But that's neither here nor there, because we really didn't want a garage in the first place. We wanted a storage building, so.
Just for the benefit of the board and Mr. Kohlhoff, the language in the covenants is that if any person shall violate or threaten to violate any provision of this instrument, it shall be lawful for any person or persons owning property in the subdivision to institute proceedings at law or in equity to enforce the provisions of this instrument, to restrain the person violating or threatening to violate them, and to recover damages actual and punitive for such violations. So the way this is set up, any person or persons owning property in the subdivision may enforce the covenants. So there is no homeowners association, but the covenants empower any person who owns property within the subdivision to take legal action to enforce the provisions of the covenants.
And those covenants are recorded with the Registered Deeds Office,
Yes,
are
they
they
are.
not?
Yes.
Which could be easily been discovered or provided to the applicant at the time that he purchased the property.
Such as in the title work?
Yes, and that is an unfortunate situation that you may have encountered and staff has run into in different situations, that often times we have found cases where the covenants aren't surfaced or provided until the parties go to the title company to sign all the closing papers, and so they might get handed that in a stack with a bunch of other items, but it seems to be more common that the covenants are noted in the title work provided at closing more so than in advance. And so we have encountered that with other situations where we have a number of subdivisions in Salina that have private streets, and the homeowners association owns and maintains the streets, not the city. And we've had cases of people who have purchased lots and indicated that they had no indication. It was not reported to them at the time they were looking at the property that the subdivision had private streets. So in an ideal situation, when somebody's considering the purchase of a property, that the covenants are provided or brought to their attention at that time. But our experience has been that a lot of times the covenants are not made note of until the parties are actually sitting in the title company signing closing papers, so.
Yes.
But if I understand this right, this is kind of a moot point now because we're looking at a storage shed instead of a detached garage, right?
Well, it's
And there's
because
no-
of the covenants that you wouldn't need to be here if that wording wasn't in there about not having the detached garage. So just trying to figure out if it's valid.
So I know we've maybe made this more confusing than we need it to be, but if Mr. Kohlhoff owned this lot and this lot was not located within a subdivision that prohibited detached garages, and he was willing to construct a garage with driveway access, he could build a garage in this location that's 24 feet by 32 feet or 768 square feet.
Correct.
What he's proposing, again, is to construct a storage building that's larger than 360 square feet, but smaller than a garage that he could build there if he was not in a subdivision that prohibited detached garages. So,
Yet it still exceeds the 18 by 20
yes.
size for a actual storage building.
Right. So what you're looking at is, the allowed size for a storage building, regardless of covenants or anything else, is 18 feet by 20 feet. And the proposed size is 30 feet by 20 feet. And so the rationale advanced by the applicant in his application is that because I'm unable to have two accessory buildings, a garage and a storage building, I am requesting to put that square footage into a larger storage building.
Okay. Mr. Fanning, did you have a question over here?
Yeah, I had a question for the owner of the property. In your application, you indicate that the hardship is the covenants. Would you explain to us the need for that size of a building? I know you kind of talked to it a little bit, but why that big? I mean, could you get by with a smaller building?
I kind of looked at it as far as construction, what would be the easiest to put together. So that was part of the rationale, just the ease of construction. I looked at our previous location, we had about a 200 square foot storage shed, and that was good for the storage piece, but it didn't have the workshop piece to it. At our other house, I had it was probably 12 by 15, probably 300 square foot area for my wood shop. And now with kind of the introduction of golfing into that, to be able to work on golf stuff during that time, I just thought, I need a little bigger space to swing the golf club and not hit the equipment and that kind of thing. So I've been looking at some different video equipment that goes along with the golf, because being semi-fanatical about golfing, you want to keep the swing down to as consistent a shot as possible. That I know it has nothing to do with this but anyway, you need some space for the video equipment, I guess is what I'm getting to on that.
So what you're saying is that you have three garages.
Right.
And that, where do you have the storage items now that you plan to put in the storage portion of the garage, of the building?
They're in the third garage.
So what you're explaining to us is that with all of the space that you have now, possibly a basement, 3 different car garages, that you don't have enough space to put in the things that you want to have, so you're requesting this additional building.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Having driven through the Woodland Hills subdivision very slowly over the last today and yesterday, I did not, and I don't know if staff is aware, I did not notice any. I noticed storage sheds that were in different homeowners' backyards and stuff, but I never noticed anything of this size. Are there any other buildings of this size that you're aware of in the Woodland Hills?
John, if we can go to the aerial photo, we can just kind of take a look. You won't see larger storage sheds, but you will see that there are a number of storage sheds
Right.
in neighboring properties. Here we go. Zoom in a little bit just so you can kind of get some context there, John. So you'll see that there's like one there, there's one there, there may be one there, I can't tell from this.
Yeah.
If you scroll further, there's some over here. There's one there. So you see that there is a number of them, but they are all under the 360 square feet.
Correct, right, that's where I was going with it. I just, the sheer size of that is a point of concern with me, personally, and
So
in the vein of everything here.
there is, though, the option that I could have 2 storage sheds on the property, right? No?
No.
You can't.
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Unless you apply for a variance.
There you go.
So just so everybody's having the same information, and this would apply to almost any residential lot that had sufficient land area, and so you're not exceeding your total 30% lot coverage, but a typical lot like this could have up to 1,128 square feet of accessory rear yard storage. They could have a 668 square foot detached garage and an additional storage shed up to 360 square feet. So that is a total of 1,128 square feet of accessory storage space that the zoning code allows. So if one way to look at this is look at the 1,128 square feet, and because of the covenants here, Mr. Kohlhoff has been eliminated from the option of having a 768 square foot garage, so he's limited to 360 square feet out of the 1,128 square feet that would be allowed by zoning. And then you have to look at the context of this lot in relation to the surrounding neighborhood.
Yeah, I think for me, the covenant aspect is what is the kicker for me, that, you know, there's nobody else in that neighborhood who has ever proposed or wanted to build a structure of that size, and you know, that's 204 square feet is what, 40% larger than the 360?
It would be about 240 square feet compared to 360 square feet is 67%.
It's 67%, okay.
It just occurred to me that I had one more question that I'd like to ask of staff. Is that okay?
Yes.
If we approve a variance, what does that do with the earlier document that you read that says that the individuals within the homeowner or within that district could sue the individual or take legal action?
If you approve a 600 square foot storage shed, that does not violate the covenants, because the covenants are silent as to storage sheds or storage buildings. It only addresses detached garages. So the size of the storage shed is essentially left to what the zoning code allows.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of the applicant?
No.
Okay. Seeing, hearing none, thank you. Bring it back to the board.
Is there anybody from the public?
Yes. That's right, I needed to ask if there's any input from the public. And I see none, so we'll come back to the board here. Any further discussion with the board?
Well, I was thinking along your lines that the size concerns me because no one else has built that size. And I can't help but wonder if the covenants were based on the building rather than the building and driveway that would be created by a garage. So they said they didn't want a garage, which means you would have a building of appropriate size and a driveway. So were they really concerned with the building of the driveway, or were they concerned with a building of this size being placed on the lot?
Okay.
So in my mind, it appears that, at least from what little we know about the covenants, is they may be restricting a building of this size being located on the lot.
And I would agree with that.
And then we have, another one that concerned me was the water runoff to the lot behind him. So in addition to violating the CCR, we might
I
Also
confirmed that the concern was expressed by the owner of 411 Sykes Drive, which is, I believe, directly behind
It
this to
is.
the west.
It is. Yeah, so those were my concerns, that, and he did explain a little more his justification, but his initial justification was just that the covenants prohibited him from doing it. And of course, I know that he explained that he wasn't aware of the covenants, but I have to agree with this one lady, that a lot of people perhaps bought in that neighborhood knowing there were covenants in place to protect the future changes within the housing area, which I would agree with. If I was going to buy in a place, I would find out what covenants were in effect so that I would know, because I would want to buy in a neighborhood that has those covenants. So what would we do with those people who bought in that area so that because they thought these kinds of things wouldn't be done? Are we actually taking away something of theirs?
And setting a precedent.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't really think it is messing with the spirit of intent of the covenants, just by granting the larger size. If you drive past that area, it's pretty well hidden with some mature trees and the way the structure kind of hides each individual home's backyards, that unless you're in those backyards, it'd be difficult to see the buildings even back there.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I do see that. I agree with you there. Okay.
I just keep coming back to what Mr. Andrews pointed out on, with our zoning rules as it stands, he's being punished on, the larger portion of the structure that he should be allowed as a resident here. But that's my take.
I just see 600 square feet as being excessive, just in, how I'm viewing things here, so.
Would you propose a lesser size, maybe greater than the
Well, I mean, we
storage
just
shed?
have, that is one of the board alternatives that is listed here for us, is to approve a lesser size variance than requested, if the required findings of fact can be made, so. So is there any motion by any of the board members?
Well, if I could submit that we ask open the forum to ask the owner of the property what is the lowest he would like to or could go for the size of this building, if we could do that.
We can.
So if he didn't get 600, what is the lowest he could possibly work with all of his equipment and desires and requirements, which might give us something to discuss in terms of reducing the size perhaps and still approving it.
Mr. Koloff, would you like to come forward and address that?
I've got to do some math here.
So, just so everyone, we have an 18 by 20 foot building is the max that we could issue a building permit for administratively. That's 360 square feet.
Right.
If you're 20 by 20, that's 400 square feet. If you're 20 by 24, that's 480 square feet. And the proposal that's before you is 20 by 30, which is 600 square feet. So the increments, and we don't always have to talk about the length. There's the width as well. But if you assume a 20-foot width and then the options, 18 feet doesn't require variance, 20 feet would be a lesser variance than what he had requested, would be 400 instead of 600. 20 by 24 would be 480 square feet, which would be a lesser variance than the 600 square feet being requested. So there are other 2-foot increments in there, but just as for comparison purposes, a 20 by 20 building is 400 square feet and 20 by 24 is 480 square feet. Both of those are would require variances, but lesser variances than the variance of 67% that's being requested.
Yeah, so 400 or 480, I think I could consider, something less than 600. But as Madison said, I still think that he deserves to have something a little bigger than a normal shed because he's limited. But I don't know, it just seems like we'd be going against the other people that live in the area and the covenants if we gave him all
I'm
600.
still concerned that that sets a precedent that all of a sudden,
Exactly, yeah.
it'll start popping up all over the Woodland Hills subdivision, but
But
there
if they
again,
started popping up in the area of 400 square feet, as opposed to 600, because they're allowed 280, am I correct in that?
They're allowed 360.
360,
18 by 20.
So that would only be 40 square feet more, or if we went to 480, that would only be 120 square feet more. So 400 to me looks very attractive, because it gives him more than what he would be allowed to have otherwise.
well, and I understand Mr. Koloff has not had time to really consider all that and run the numbers from his behalf. I mean, we certainly could postpone this action. I mean, there's 4 options there if we want to postpone it and address this at another time where it might be find something more viable instead of, I don't know, feel like rushing into making a decision in regards to all that.
So if I make a suggestion, and it's approved, do I have to stick with that, or can I just say, hey, I'm just not going to build the building? I don't have to get a permit to build it, do I, after the variance is made?
We'll just give you a scenario, and I'll pick the 480 square foot number. If they voted to grant you a variance to go up to 480 square feet, and your decision is that that's their decision, but for me personally, it's not feasible or worth doing, you're not obliged to build a 480 square foot building. You can choose to build nothing at all if that's not workable. But I think what the board's trying to get from you is there some dimensional that is less than 600 square feet that could still be workable for you. And so I think that was their purpose for asking you to come back up there. But I said the postponing the decision to allow additional configurations or calculations to be made is an option, but I think the main purpose is if the variance is denied outright, you could still build a building that's 360 square feet. If a lesser variance than the 600 square feet is approved and you find that doesn't meet your needs, is not feasible, you're not obligated to build that. That just means that's the maximum that we could issue a permit for.
So, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that if we look at the two that I find appealing, just 400 or 480, is there a middle ground in there that we could all 4 live with?
I mean, it really has to do with the design that works for the contractor and everything.
Right.
What I was thinking is if we could approve 440, for example, then he could go to a contractor and say, I'm limited to 440. What can you give me for that?
Yeah, I saw him, he's pacing.
Because he would know what his limit is. And then if that wouldn't work, then he could come back and ask for a second variance, could he not? Or I guess he couldn't, because we'd already have approved a variance. If we approved
There
400
is, and it's not as common, but any property owner who believes that the limitation of having one single storage shed or storage building on their property is too limiting, they may apply for a variance to have a second building, or somebody who has a storage shed and a garage already and wants to have a third building. The way that they would do that would be to apply for a variance, but then they just have to present the justification for why I need a third building or why I need a second storage shed. But just as in this case, any property owner has a right to apply for a variance to a limitation. In this case, Mr. Kohlhoff has applied for a variance to the 360-foot size limitation.
So, but if we as a board approved a motion today that he could go up to, but not exceed 440, and then he goes back to his architect, and they say, we can't possibly do it, you really need 500 or 560, then that would strengthen his justification. But could he come back and ask us to revisit a variance in excess of the 400 that we gave him?
Yes.
Good, okay.
Would you need a new application and pay the fee again?
He would need a new application. The alternative to that is what the chair discussed, which is, one option is to postpone
Yeah.
consideration to allow him to get with his designer and look at that and then come back at a future date and report back that he's looked at this, it's simply not feasible. I need 600 square feet and this is why. So it would actually be more to a benefit to the applicant to keep the application open while he does that exploring, because if you make a decision and it doesn't work for him and he wants to come back, he would have to file another application and do that again, whereas he has an active application now, and if he requests, or you think it's advisable to allow him to go back to the drawing board, so to speak, and look at options or configurations, then postponing consideration to your November meeting, or excuse me, October meeting, is an option that would keep his options alive and not require him to submit any new application.
Okay.
Okay. Is that viable then?
So, what I would like to suggest, because I'm the designer of this thing, so I
Oh, okay.
kind of know where I'm at there.
Okay.
Just looking at sizes of building materials and everything, 480 looks like it would be a good number. I mean, if I had to reduce it, then everything's still kind of in the sequence there. If we say 480, like right now I've got building dimensions. What happens to the building dimensions? Does it make any difference as far as like?
You can adjust the width, the length. I mean, if you want a 16-foot wide and make it longer, then you're given a square footage limit, but the width to depth ratio is whatever design that you come up with that's 480 or 400 or 440 in size. So it's not saying it has to be 16 feet wide or 20 feet wide. That is your decision.
And I might just mention, my intent in doing this is to improve the quality of the property and not make an eyesore. We've got designs for doing stuff in the front of the yard. We're looking at putting a deck on the back of the house. So we do have kind of a grand scheme of things, and this kind of plays into what that's going to look like. So that's just, obviously we don't want to addition or anything that would decrease the property value of the house, because we're probably going to be selling it in the next 10 years or whatever, when we move to Presbyterian Manor or whatever. But anyway, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Question for staff is, are there any, do we know of any recorded easements, utility easements that are going to play into this? I believe I saw one that photos
There are
over.
utility easements in the rear yard,
Right.
but our building is outside of those.
Okay, all right. That was my only question. I ran across that in my own personal situation on utility easement, so. So is there a motion from any of the board members?
Why can't we just put it up?
Yeah, I move that we approve an alternate variance of 480 square feet maximum for this storage shed. And I used the justification that the covenants are silent on the specifics of a storage shed, but are quite clear on the specifics for no garage, a separate garage. And this motion would include all staff recommendations with the change to number 5 to be the 480 square foot storage shed, and would add one more item to that, which is that the applicant would coordinate with the staff to develop the sizes of this building to conform to all the current codes so that it would not be in violation of any of those.
I'll second that motion.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion on the floor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion's passed.
So we'll get you a letter summarizing what occurred today and be in communication with you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Having finalized those two items on the agenda, the administrative items will go on to items 3.3, annual business meeting, election of officers.
So, for the upcoming 2019-2020 term, we are at full membership with 7 appointed members. Absent today are Brian Bennett and Owen Freiberger, who serves as the Planning Commission representative on the board currently. He remains in that capacity until the mayor appoints his replacement. The Planning Commission has nominated or suggested that John Olson, Planning Commission member, take his place, but we need to confirm his willingness and ability to serve in that capacity, and then he would have to be appointed by the mayor. So until that happens, we have 6 members and a youth member, Luke Stanford, who had to leave earlier today. So as we look at the position of chair, that position is currently vacant, and the position is available to any member currently serving on the board. And so Mr. Holmgren served as the vice chair last term, and he is eligible for both position of chair and vice chair. But the first order of business would be to look for nominations for an individual to serve as the board chair for the upcoming year.
Can I ask, is it just to question, or just to understand the amount of effort that Mr. Holgrim's put in? He was chairman when I came to the board, wasn't he? And then...
He did serve a position of chair for
Chair.
times, yes. We've
Okay.
had situations in the past where we haven't had a full membership, and that puts even more stress on.
Yeah.
Because then you have fewer people to choose from, but Mr. Holmgren has served in both capacities in the past.
Yeah, well, and I would support you strongly, but I'm not sure you'd be interested because you've already put a lot of service forth for the board, and I appreciate that.
Well, I nominate Mr. Fanning to be our new chair.
I'd second that, if that's how we roll on this. I don't remember how we appoint.
Do we have any discussion with regards to that?
No, I'm fine with that. This is my 3rd year on the board? Yeah.
All right. All those in favor of Mr. Fanning as chairman for the 2019-2020 calendar year, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Motion's carried. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Then we need a
chair.
nomination or suggestion for a person to fill the role of vice chair. And as I've gone back and looked at this, I do believe that Mr. Holmgren is eligible for another term as vice chair, but anyone currently sitting on the board is eligible to serve as the vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Holmgren to serve as vice chair.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Well, discussion, is that really what you want?
Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
Oh, you're okay with that, okay. Because you put in a lot of years. I wouldn't want you to keep putting in time, extra time.
All right, all those in favor of the motion as David Holmgren for vice chair, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried.
So we will communicate with you what the outcome is with Mr. Olson, or who's going to be stepping into Mr. Freiberger's shoes. I think it's very likely that he'll be relocating from the Salina community, but he made it clear that even if he wasn't, he wanted to pass the baton to someone else on the planning commission to fill that slot. So that is subject to mayoral appointment, and so we'll communicate that with you. I will look to Dustin to be sure, but at this time, it does not look like we have an application that's been filed for our October meeting. So we have officers, but it looks like you'll get October off from what we can tell at this time.
Okay. Do we have any other unfinished or other business?
I don't have anything from the staff side. If there's anything that board members have a question or want to bring up, that would be a time to do that.
I don't have any. No one else? Okay. And no public forums, since we have no one in the public, so I will call this meeting adjourned.
Well, we would like, if possible, to have a motion to adjourn in a second so that
All right.
Crystal can record that, so.
Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I motion to adjourn the meeting.
I second.
We have a second. And who do I have as a second? All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion's carried. Meeting is adjourned.
So we will